Our next speaker is Kevin Bodnaruk. Kevin is contracted by GRDC to assist us in the investments we make in supporting registration of products, developing permits and getting products registered where there is failure in the marketplace to do so. And we have a number of, so it's considerable investment that's made in that area, not just the investment in herbicide activity, but this is actually about the pathways to registration. So supporting the development of registration of new products. And there's something like, something like $600,000 I think invested in a couple of the programs you're involved in, Kevin, which is really to connect more closely with the APVMA to make sure that we can fast track product development. So welcome, Kevin, thanks for joining us today and look forward to your presentation. Change that.
Thanks, Bill. What I'm going to do is just a slightly little bit different to, I suppose, what Mike was talking about. I'll just do a little bit initially with the actual projects that I'm currently working on for GRDC, which is taking, if you like, some of the data that comes from the work that's been funded by GRDC and how we try and take that through to enable extensions and this type of thing. And then I'll talk a bit more about the research permit side of things and then finish up a little bit of just a quick discussion, if you like, about MRLs. From an R&D viewpoint, the Pathways project is basically, it's got one main objective: improve the access to priority chemical-based pest management solutions. So what we're looking at trying to do there is to fill those gaps that are emerged, if you like, over years because of either resistance, new pests emerging, new crops being developed, that type of thing, or new systems being, I suppose, hit upon by growers and this type of thing. So the main outcome is increased availability of pest management options. I've covered that, but the key thing is the bottom there is that often what's happening with older chemicals in particular is we've got no registrant priority. You know, the legacy registrant, if you like, is no longer interested in the compound. It's been manufactured in China, it's retailed here in Australia cheaper than they can actually manufacture it, so there's very little interest in them actually going forward with it. So something, if you like, has to sort of be promoted to try and fill those gaps. And that's where the project that we're trying to do is to, if you like, harvest that type of information that's out there and actually use it towards a particular purpose of actually gaining those regulatory approvals. So how are we doing that? First off, there's a database that's been created. It's been running for a couple of years now, for about 3 or 4 years. In the GRDC application process, there's a box where an applicant has to tick that if there's a pesticide, is there a pesticide or pesticide usage actually involved in the project. If it is, they tick that box, then that immediately triggers, if you like, a signal to us that we need to then contact those people and actually collect the information about what they're actually working on. Now, the database is operational. It's got about over 230 projects, pesticide-related projects in the database at the moment, and it goes back to about 2008, 2009 in terms of the stuff that we've been collecting. Now, it is a relational database, but it's more of, if you like, a pointer. It doesn't actually hold, per se, the information that's been generated. It's more just to identify the fact that so-and-so has worked on a particular compound in a particular crop, and they've done certain things, whether it's a residue trial or efficacy trial, crop safety. It's just basically to highlight the fact that something's been done. And part of the reason behind that was that we can not reinvent the wheel, that somebody in WA may have already looked at some aspect to do with lupins, for argument's sake, and means that then someone in, say, Wagga doesn't need to actually worry about that. Or if they've got a particular question, it'll point them to that person. The other flip side of that, I suppose, is also to be able to provide some of this information as feedback, if you like, to actual registrants. Because one of the concerns is that often people can spend a number of years working on a compound and then find that A, there's no registered interest, or conversely we can find a situation where there's no hope of actually getting that use registered for a number of reasons. It may well be missing data, there may well be issues about exposure, there could be a whole range of issues. But you could end up avoiding the situation where people end up going off on a tangent, if you like, potentially then generating data which could influence farm practices for use that will never get registered. And then you've actually got a real problem on your hands, particularly if there's an uptake of that use. So we've got the database. The next thing is, from our point of view, what do we do with that data? So we have a prioritised chemical by crop use options. There's a couple of hundred options in there, and we try and prioritise that as best as we can with input from various groups, and I'll cover on that. And then we take it to what we call a Category 25 application. The APVMA currently has 25 application categories, and Category 25 is the last one. And it's a bit of a grabble. It basically is anything that doesn't fit in the first 24. And so it's a bit of an initiative where it's in effect a user industry initiated label amendments. What we do is we actually apply to the APVMA to have a use pattern, if you like, assessed. They assess it. So that's what, in actual fact, that's what the application is, to get the actual use pattern assessed. We provide the data, it's assessed, and then what they will do, if they agree, if you like, with the proposal, they will then write to the various registrants and tell them that they can amend their labels accordingly. Today we've had some success. I think we shortened the withholding period on paraquat from 14 days to 7. We recently just got something on deltamethrin in lentils approved. I mean, there's been a permit for about 10 years. We've now got it onto registrants can change their labels. That's just an example of what the database looks like, the sort of information that's captured in there, just indicating that this is some residue work that in another project where we funded some work on imazamox and fava beans, because there was a minor use permit out there that from an APVMA point of view, they needed to know what the residues were doing, what sort of residue levels could we find. And so we had to fund a couple of residue trials. Now that's the sort of information that we're capturing. So if at some point someone wants to progress, say, imazamox registration in fava beans, we've got some data there that potentially could be useful. So in terms of the options, basically, where do they come from? As indicated up there, it comes from the Grower Solutions groups, it comes from the PIBs. We rely heavily on people like Pulse Australia, Wayne Hawthorne, people like that to actually, if you like, identify these uses that need to be looked at and pursued. And also then we also talk to the registrants and the regulator. And this comes back to that thing about there's no point in pursuing something if there's no other hope of getting a registrant support or getting it past the regulator. And I think Bill touched on propizamide, and propizamide sort of falls into that sort of a category at the moment where we're trying to find our way through or we satisfy the requirements in terms of being able to try and take this forward to where we can actually look at getting approvals for, say, use in pulses. Then from that point of view, the options list is reviewed. We confirm that we do have the data, that it is a priority, and then we go through what are the next steps. And it may well be additional data generation, or it may well just be pulling the application together and submitting it to the APVMA. To give you an example of the sorts of things that we're working on, we've currently got work on haloctyphop and canola. There's been a number of issues coming up with haloctyphop residues turning up in canola above the MRLs. And that's been a real concern. And so one of the things that we've been looking at there is we've been working with Dow, with the APVMA, and looking at, well, how do we tighten up, if you like, the timing around the use of haloctyphop while preserving the current MRL, because that's the MRL in Japan. From the Oilseeds Federation's point of view and the traders, they don't want a higher MRL in Australia because that then basically potentially closes off Japan as a market. So it's a matter of saying, well, okay, how do we work with this? So we've got an application with the APVMA to actually tighten the wording around the time of the use in canola. There's an application for imazethapyr in lentils, for imidazole tolerant lentils. We've got an application there to actually, again, amend the labels so that I'll specifically mention that imazethapyr can be used on PBX Herald and PBA Hurricane. So that's an application. Methanol mung beans, we've got another one where we're looking at increasing the number of applications of tebuconazole in cereals. Where Bayer provided an amount of data, GRDC funded some trial work, so we have an application with the APVMA to increase it from, I think, rather than one application at 290 mils, it'll be 2 applications at 290 mils, or 4 applications at 145 mils per hectare. So again, a significant change, if you like, in what the label will allow. But again, we're trying to keep it within the current label recommendations and this type of thing, in terms of the MRLs. Another area we've got into is, I suppose, this issue to do with chemical review. Dimethoate was under review by the APVMA. And one of the issues that they identified was that there was a significant data gap when it came to things like the pulses and peanuts. It's relied upon heavily in those crops, I gather, in the north, particularly for aphid control and sucking pest control. And so again, there's data generated there, residue data generated there, so that the APVMA can undertake their risk assessment. Probably more relevant to you guys, the bottom two, we have applications with the APVMA to register quizalofop and haloctyphop in summer fallow for difficult to control grasses. We've got glyphosate tolerant or glyphosate resistant grasses using the double knock. So it's again where you're going in with the haloctyphop or the quizalofop followed by paraquat. And this is an example where we've put the application together from work that was done by the Northern Grower Alliance, the Arana Group, and also from Central Queensland. We've pulled that sort of information together and put the application into the APVMA. One point I would make with respect to that was that, and this is one of the things that we might get into a little bit more, is the actual trial designs and this sort of thing. Now, one of the difficulties we had with this was that when the work was done, there was a core, if you like, of key treatments which enabled us to be able to go forward because a significant amount of work was done. But when we laid it all out and looked at the data, there were over 58 treatments looked at. And that's one of the problems, I suppose, when you've got different diverse groups working on these sorts of issues, that people will start to, if you like, evaluate their own mixes, maybe something that's more regionally relevant to them and this sort of stuff. And then if you try to pull that together then to actually satisfy the APVMA, you might have a problem in terms of actually being able to come up with a specific use pattern that can get put onto a label. Well, that's what I suppose I was covering out there, the data generation side. And this follows on, I suppose, more on from what Mike was saying. Mike's covered off on the, obviously if it's from a regulatory point of view, if you're dealing with registered products and you're complying with a label, then it really doesn't matter. You know, you're complying with what's currently on the label, you can test it and do what you like with it. For an unregistered product, and that's where it's unregistered for that particular use, Mike's covered the small plot side of things, the permit 7250. Now from a large scale point of view, you require a research permit. Where we're talking about multiple hectares being evaluated, you need a research permit. Now the main point of the research permit is that it enables the APVMA to undertake their risk assessment. They'll undertake their risk assessment and they'll set a temporary MRL if it's required. So that way, if you like, you've got that regulatory protection. In terms of going forward, whether it's the ultimate aim, if you like, or the end of that process, the data needs to meet the APVMA regulatory requirements. So from the point of view of an assessment, if we're talking about small plot trials, there needs to be the replication. We need to have untreated controls. There needs to be statistical analysis, yield, efficacy, that type of thing. That's the sort of information that needs to be pulled together. You know, comparative work where you might just have a range of products in there just compared to each other, and a factorial analysis or something like that done may or not get past, if you like, the efficacy point, the review point of view. So again, it's that sort of thing to bear in mind, that there is a specific guideline in the APVMA, I think it's called MRLs, the acronym they use, that dictates how these trials need to be done, or at least that provides some guidelines. That's the actual 7250 permit. I don't think I need to go into that. Mike's covered that pretty well. The key issues are that you've got a total of 5 hectares nationally, the maximum 1 hectare in each jurisdiction. The point when it talks about no consumption or exposure, is essentially what they're talking about is crop destruction. So if there's no MRL in place, it can't be fed to livestock and it can't be fed to humans. So you basically crop destruct. That's essentially what that means. So that's something you've got to bear in mind. So if you're trialling an unregistered product in a crop and there's no MRL, there's no approval, there's no permits, you're at crop destruct. So that's the issue that needs to be remembered there. For the large-scale research permits, these are category 23. They're done on a modular basis, so depending upon the nature of the permit, whether it requires OH&S assessment, environment assessment, residues, efficacy, there may well be a number of issues that need to be looked at. They can take 6 to 9 months to be looked at, and there are fees associated with that. Now for a minor use permit, where say you might have a use that you need to get something in favour beans or something like that, there's a $350 fee. That's cross-subsidised by the actual sales level on pesticide sales. But a research permit is full cost recovery, and depending upon what needs to be assessed, the cost can be between $2,000 and $14,000. So that's something that just needs to be kept in mind. So while there may well be an intent, if you like, to do some large-scale trial work with an unregistered product, to avoid the pitfalls, if you like, of MRL exceedances and that type of thing, you'll need a research permit, but obviously there needs to be a fair amount of planning in that. It's not something that can be done overnight. Right, now in terms of MRLs, I've almost finished this presentation. The thing to remember with MRLs is that they're essentially a compliance tool. The MRL is not purely, but essentially it's based on the residues that have resulted from approved use patterns. So there's a number of what they call, supervised residue trials are done. It's worst case, if you like, the critical use pattern, so it's maximum number of applications, maximum rate following the withholding period, the grain, if you like, or whatever's harvested, and then the residues are looked at, and then they set an MRL based on that. And it's reflecting what they call good agricultural practice. So that's what it's reflecting. It's not a health issue per se, though it can be influenced by health standards. And this is the issue with this, I think, where people sometimes get unstuck, is that MRLs can differ between countries. Because there could be a particular use pattern in a country that doesn't exist here. They may well have a pest or a situation where they use it. Like the US, they love to have one-day withholding periods. That's just a quirk that they have. And as a consequence, their MRLs will reflect that. Other countries in Europe, it may well be much significantly longer withholding periods. And so you end up with, because of those differences, you end up with different MRLs. Now, there is a thing called Codex, or the Codex Alimentarius, which is the United Nations Food Standard Setting Organisation, and they assess data and then they set MRLs, if you like, that are meant to be global. Unfortunately, not everybody accepts them, Australia being one, but we have a fairly heavy input into that. And to give you an example, there was some work done, I think, a few years ago with ivermectin, or a firm in Canola. There was permits granted, it's now registered. Now that data has now gone, if you like, to the FAO, and we're hoping to have a Codex MRL by mid-2015. So it's a slow process from the time this first started to the data actually being submitted to the MRLs being established. So we've got them here in Australia, then we'll soon have them internationally. Now the Europeans, if the MRL goes through Codex and they accept that, then they'll incorporate that MRL into their own MRL system. Japan looks at these things also and can incorporate these MRLs. So over a period of time, you end up with MRLs being spread around a fairly large area in terms of potential trading partners. So it's an issue there that needs to be remembered. But as I said, it comes back to this issue that reflects the use pattern. As I said, it can be impacted on by health standards. There are two essential things from a health standard point of view that are considered. One is the acceptable daily intake, which is, if you like, the long-term or chronic exposure, and the other is short-term impact or acute. And in that, that's where they consider the potential impacts. The long-term is like how much can you be exposed to every day of your life. The other issue is what is the, if you like, the maximum that someone might encounter in a day, for argument's sake. In the acute, and this is where you may well have heard, may not have, a lot of fuss been going on about fenthyne and fruit fly. Now the issue with fenthyne is essentially the short-term impact. The acute reference dose is like the amount that a person can be exposed to in a 24-hour period or in a setting is so small that it's meant that things like edible peel commodities like stone fruit, this sort of thing, basically the product can't be used. The label, I think, used to have 3 days. The shortest they can get in there now and meet that, I think, is probably about 21 days, and that's on things like nectarines. On peaches, it's probably likely to be 28 days. So it has a significant impact from that point of view. So these are the sort of things where they can, if you like, come back and bite you. So even though the MRL may well reflect good agricultural practice per se, when you start looking at some of the health implications, it may well be basically mean that you can't actually go forward with it. And that's where things need to be sort of considered. From a grains point of view, I suppose the classic example for that was probably fipronil, where the again, the ADI for fipronil was so low that pretty much, I think people talk about the risk cup being full. That the number of uses that are there currently approved is such that there's really very little room under the ADI for any additional uses to be added. So as soon as people start talking about, say, potentially looking at fipronil in cropping situations, if it requires the setting of an MRL, then you're likely to run into a problem with the exceedance of the ADI. So then you've got a problem. So where do you go? The only way that could work was if other uses get taken off the label, if you like. And so then how do you determine that? And who's going to be the one that's going to tell somebody that they can no longer use it in a crop because another crop wants to have access to it? So there's issues like that that need to be considered. So these are things that need to be worked through, if you like, when you're looking at these projects or ideas for things, that it's not just a simple matter of going out and saying, okay, we can go out and test this and we'll see what's going to happen, but where is it likely to end up? Can it actually end up on a label? Does it need to go onto a label? So that's my presentation.